Somebody has written this quote, and I think it really summarizes it well. It says, the inner life of a survivor of trauma is a battleground between the forces of discouragement and the forces of hope and determination. So there's part of you that says, man, I am one sick puppy. I have got a ton of work. This is discouraging. And then there's the other part of you that says, no, I want to deal with this. I've seen a little bit of growth and it's worth the effort. I'm going to do it. And that, on any given day, one side can be stronger than the other. And that's the reality of dealing with this trauma. So what do we have to do? That's what I want to focus on. So I want to start just by laying some groundwork. So the first thing I want you to hear is it is possible to heal from complex trauma. It may seem overwhelming at this point, and you may feel discouraged, but it is possible to heal. Secondly, the goal in healing from complex trauma is really two parts. The first and the big picture is you need to reconnect. So the reality of complex trauma is it splits you in pieces as a human. You disconnect from emotions, from pain. You disconnect from a lot of your thinking because you don't like it. You don't want to ever appear vulnerable, so you try to be less of a human, and you get smaller and smaller and more disconnected. And so the goal in dealing with complex trauma is to help people reconnect to all of their emotions, all of their thinking, to be in touch with who they are, and that is the journey. But there's a second part to this. I don't want you to just heal from complex trauma. I want this thing called resiliency to kick in. And what that means is that you transform your trauma. So instead of it being this negative piece in your life, you say, I am going to learn skills from this that are going to make me stronger and better than if I never had any trauma at all. And again, like I said last week, some of the most beautiful people I know are people who have gone through trauma and they've transformed it into becoming even greater, more wonderful people than they would have been otherwise. That is the goal. Number 3, and you have to throw this in, you have to pace yourself. Many of you, being good addicts, are saying, let's go and deal with this trauma 24/7. So I'm going to talk about it. Every waking minute, I'm going to be bugging somebody about it. I'm going to be processing it. And I'm going to drive myself crazy and burn myself out. Dealing with trauma is a marathon, not a sprint. And so you have to pace yourself, and you have to really be aware that you're doing healthy self-care. One of the things that is always important is that as you deal with it and you grow, you begin to have less and less occurrences of stuff that comes up. So you're beginning to deal with it, might be more intense, but that intensity can begin to level off, and then you deal with stuff as it comes up. But you need to pace yourself. Number 4, you need to deal with complex trauma at 2 levels. And this is important to understand. You have to deal with level 1, which is just what is happening in your life today, in the present. And so you're going to find that a lot of stuff that happens in your life that causes you concern, conflict, stress, all of that, you need to be on top of it because it is playing into your trauma stuff. And often it will lead you to understand your trauma better and to learn tools, okay? But there's a second level, and that is that you're going back purposely with a counselor to look at the stuff that happened to you in the past, and you're going through therapy, working through it, and it will involve grieving. It will involve getting in touch with emotions and feelings and thoughts that all came out of there. It will involve being able to express all of those emotions in a safe environment. That is so important, but you have to be working at 2 levels. and that you will need a good counselor who's aware of that and can help you do that. Next one. Number 5. Be compassionate towards yourself. Here's what I find happens normally with people who have complex trauma. Remember the second talk, we says it affects how we think about ourselves or how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as less than, not good enough. So what happens often when people begin to realize how much complex trauma they have and how it has influenced them in all areas of their life is they go, I hate myself, I'm mad at myself, I'm such a loser, and they beat themselves up for all their unhealthy coping and for all of their relationship issues. Look at it this way. Say, you know what? I was a little kid. For most of you, I was a little kid when this happened, and I was just trying to survive. And so the skills I learned were basically survival skills at that point in time. Yes, I've come to realize later in life that they weren't healthy skills, but as a little child, I didn't know that. I was just doing what seemed to work. And then you can just be compassionate towards yourself. Okay, so that's kind of the background framework. Now I want to get into the key components of healing from trauma. Number 1, there's a relationship element. You can't heal from complex trauma all by yourself. All of us wish we could, but we can't. We wish we could just read a textbook or listen to a set of lectures and then we just figure it all out and we're good. You need relationships. You need to be able to reach out for help. Now let me kind of give you why this is a big issue and why it is an important issue for you to think about. One of the things that characterizes people from complex trauma is you never want to be a burden to anybody. You never want to show weakness because people will resent you. People will shun you or reject you because you're too needy or you got too many problems. And so you try to keep all of that inside. You have to fight that. You have to overcome that. You have to say, that's old thinking that got me nowhere. I need to reach out, not to everybody you meet, but to a few people that you can trust. And we'll get back to that in a minute. The second thing is, here's what research is showing us. And this is fascinating to me. And I put it in italics there. But all of the research is coming in. And here's what it is saying. In order to develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more adults. In other words, a child to develop in a healthy way needs at least one, preferably two healthy adults very involved in their life at all the different stages. And then it says this, they need one or more adults who have an irrational, emotional relationship with a child. What does that mean? Somebody's got to be crazy about that kid. That's number 1, first, last, and always. It is all about developing an intimate relationship with somebody who is healthy. Somebody that's not interested in you romantically, but somebody that you can look up to and develop close communication with spiritually, intellectually. You can be open about stuff in your life and you can just start getting all of it out. That is so important. And so you want somebody who takes the time to get to know you, and they accept you for who you are. And then it's really important that this person is healthy enough to have healthy boundaries. Because what will happen often with complex trauma is that you don't want people to have boundaries. If you got an issue, you want to talk about it now, even if it's 3 a.m, because it's bugging you. Now, if it was a really legitimate thing that couldn't wait, hopefully they would talk to you at 3 a.m. But they need to know you well enough to have a sense for that. So the relationship piece is huge. Now, let me take it a little bit further, okay? I've got two down arrows there. One is deeper intimacy, and the other is deeper issues. Okay, so think of it this way. Your greatest wounds came from your most intimate relationships. Okay? So let's just say this. You work with somebody and you talk about the weather, you talk about the Blue Bombers, all of that stuff. Not many of your issues are going to come up. In fact, they're going to go home and they're going to tell their family, I work with this person that is absolutely wonderful. And they're going to say they don't have any problems in the world. Why? Because there's no intimacy, so none of your issues. But if that person you were to get in a deeper and a deeper relationship with, guess what's going to start popping up? Your issues. And now they're going to go home and they're going to say to their family, I worked with somebody, they got problems. They got some stuff happening. I wouldn't have known it unless there was a more intimate relationship. Now take that further. Guess where your issues will come up the most? In a deeply committed romantic relationship and with your children. Why? Because it's the most intimate. What I want you to understand is this. In order to heal your deepest issues, you need to develop a healthy, intimate relationship so that as your stuff comes up, you're able to deal with it in a safe and healthy way. A lot of people will come to me and they'll say, you know what, I went through a program, I learned so much about complex trauma, I did so much work on myself, I thought I was healed from all of that. Then I got in a relationship and it's like I forgot everything I ever learned. And I thought, I'm stupid. I've regressed. I've gone backward in time. And it's no, when you were in a classroom setting, you didn't have any intimacy with anybody, so no issues came up. But when you get into a deeper and deeper intimate relationship, more stuff comes up. And so that relationship is really important. Secondly, in the very practical stuff, is grounding. And I don't want to take tons of time here because this is really what gets focused on a lot. You may have heard the term mindfulness or grounding. And so how it works is this. If I'm counseling somebody that I know has a lot of trauma issues, what I do before we get into any of those issues is to have some stuff in place that they can do if stuff starts to get a little too intense. That's grounding. It's a way for you, when you're feeling the pressure mounting inside, to kind of get reconnected with reality and to de-escalate yourself so that you're able to be safe and you're able to process the stuff going on inside you. So there's kind of 4 things that are done as far as grounding. So the first is mental grounding, and that is if you're really starting to get agitated and you can feel you're getting to that fight or flight kickoff point and you're about to run out of the room, your counselor might say, okay, just take a breath and describe for me everything that you see in this room in detail. And by doing that, it just helps you to disconnect temporarily from going through the trauma, and then you kind of get settled down again. But you kind of have to figure out kind of what helps you when you're working through stuff to settle yourself down. Others have you visualize going to a safe place. And that could be picture in your mind the place from your childhood that was the most safe place where you loved to go when you just wanted to feel safe. Can you go there in your mind? And if this starts getting too intense, just take a break and go there for a little while in your mind and just chill. Secondly is the physical grounding. And so some people will just have you touch stuff. They'll have you put your feet on the floor so that you can feel it. They'll have you focus on your breathing, that kind of thing, or even get up and do some stretching. That's physical grounding. Third is soothing statements or self-talk at that point in time. And this is important in this sense, okay? So I want to read it. So you might say, my name is Tim. I am safe right now. So you're reminding yourself, I'm in a safe place. I am at, and you can give the location, the date is, and I am, and your present age. Because you're going to feel like you're a little kid again. And I am in the present and not in the past. That can be very helpful in just getting everything in focus again. And then some people find it helpful to say positive affirmations like, I have grown a lot in the last year, and I'm very thankful and very proud of the work I've done. That kind of stuff that just is affirming for you. The final one, EMDR, you may have heard of it. It's becoming more and more popular. And what it is that you move your eyes back and forth to the extreme. As far as you can look to the left, as far as you can look to your right. And you might say, that sounds hokey. But it's actually very well researched medically. Remember last week we talked about the brain stores memories in two different parts of the brain. One part is the details, one part is the emotion. What that eye movement does is it helps those two parts of the brain connect. And I have talked with several people that have done it, and they have found it to be very helpful. So, if they're going into that emotional part of the brain that is getting agitated and fight-flight wants to kick in, by doing EMDR, it helps engage the thinking part of the brain, and it helps them connect stuff in the brain. So it can be very helpful for people. So that is just grounding, and I would encourage you, if you're going to be working on trauma stuff, that you have a couple of those grounding techniques in your back pocket that will help you at that time. The next part, so we've got a relationship part, there's a cognitive part, a thinking part, a brain part. Complex trauma, which we looked at the first night, is basically a distortion of reality. What is happening is, by the response of people in authority in your life, they are sending you a message that you don't matter, or they are sending you a message that makes you feel unsafe and that it's your fault. That's all distorted. And what happens is you begin believing lie after lie about yourself, about life, about how to be happy, about how to have relationships. All of that is happening at a subconscious level, but you are building thought patterns that are full of lies. And so part of dealing with trauma is beginning to understand what happens in your brain at the thinking level, and to begin replacing the lies with the truth. Second part of the thinking is that what happens in that complex trauma is you develop a whole bunch of negative thought loops, is what I call them. It's kind of internal self-talk. It's like something happens, and it's like somebody, if you go back to the old cassette days or the CD days, they push the play button and then the tape just starts playing. And that can be, I'm such a failure, I can't do anything right, I'll never amount to anything, and that just starts playing. You don't even have to go looking for it. It just is automatic. Or, I'm so stupid, I'll never figure this stuff out, or this is just way too much, I might as well quit, I'll never be able to handle it. And you talk yourself into very negative places. And so part of what needs to happen in dealing with trauma is that when that is triggered, you're able to stop yourself and say, listen, brain, that's not true. And you're able to catch those thought loops that go around and around and begin to challenge them or argue with them and replace them. That is so important. The third thing that happens in complex trauma, and we looked at this, is emotional reasoning. So it goes like this. Dad didn't give me any attention today. It feels like I don't matter. Okay, so emotions, it feels like I don't matter. My brain says, so it must be true that I don't matter. That's emotional reasoning. And what happens when you're triggered? So let's say you go over to visit your parents, or a friend says something critical, and you go, that feels like rejection, so it must be rejection. It feels like abandonment. It feels like I'm stupid, so it must be true that I'm stupid. And you have to be able to stop and say, that isn't the truth. Just because it feels like I don't matter doesn't mean I don't matter. And so that becomes a part of your healing process. What they're now seeing is every thought that I have affects all of the cells, every cell of my body, my overall brain health, and my mental health. My thinking affects everything, right down to the last cell. And so we're beginning to understand more and more that much of the battle in healing from trauma is in the mind. I have to begin to challenge my thinking, to understand my distortions, to understand my emotional reasoning, and that is so important. So there's two kind of paths in counseling or psychology today that many of you have probably heard of: CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy, or DBT, dialectic behavior therapy. What they're basically all about is what I've just described. There's so much importance in learning to think better, to understand how I think when I'm under stress, how I think when I'm struggling with life. All of those things, it's so important to your well-being and healing to begin unraveling that and replacing it with the truth. And so the danger with that is a lot of people say, okay, I just got to correct my healing. So you go back to, I don't need any people in my life. I just need to read books and take classes and learn. You're going to get a lot of benefit from that. But if you don't get the other pieces, you're probably going to not get very far. And so that is so essential. Next thing. You can learn about complex trauma from me through books. But when the deepest healing happens is when you're in life, in those intimate relationships, and you get triggered by something. Once you're triggered, that is where all of the old stuff comes back in a wave. It just floods over you, and you go into fight, flight. You go from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond. All the old thinking, all the old feeling comes back in a heartbeat. And that, in that nanosecond of time, you have a choice to make. Do I go and give in to all the old stuff, or do I choose to respond in a new way? That is the most difficult part of healing, but that's where the deepest healing takes place. Everybody wants to heal from complex trauma without going through things that trigger complex trauma. It's impossible because you don't understand all of your stuff until you're in a trigger situation. Picture yourself where you're in a conflict with a good friend or your partner and you're really having a fight, okay? Everything at that point in time wants to say, you don't like me, you're going to abandon me, you're a jerk, you're disrespecting me, and everything in you is just in trauma mode. At that point in time, when you're feeling all of that, is when you have to make your decision. Am I going to do it the old way or the new way? And you know you don't have a whole lot of time to make that decision. And the reality is this: usually the first time after you've learned about it, you make the wrong decision. But that's where you need somebody in your life where you can sit down with them and process it and learn from your failure. But in that moment of time, you have powerful, powerful sensations going through your body, and none of them are pleasant. And everything in you just wants to make it go away. And that's where people run to a counselor and say, fix me right now. Wave your magic wand so I don't have to feel these feelings. And I go, you know what? You got to feel them because that's being triggered. You're triggering stuff from your past. Sit in it, won't kill you, but we can now choose different ways. And if you choose different ways, the next time it won't be as intense. And then the next time it'll be less intense, less painful, until it's hardly an issue at all. That's the process, and that's the least popular part of the process. So most of us only heal from complex trauma if we're forced to face this painful stuff, and we do it kicking and screaming. And you know what forces us to face this stuff? Is we finally find ourselves in a relationship with either another person, a partner, or with children, and we experience love for them, and we go, I don't want to deal with this, I want to run away, but I don't want to lose my relationship or my kids. So I'm forced to deal with it, and I don't like it, and I'm not happy about it, and I'm stomping my foot the whole time, but you're dealing with it. And that is such a hard thing. And I went back to all the old ways, and I go, don't beat yourself up. You might have failed this time, but you learned stuff. And now you can begin to learn what you would do differently next time. And you can begin to process what you just went through and grow from it in a really big, important way. One thing I want to add with this. One of the sad realities of complex trauma goes like this. The child of complex trauma was a victim, okay? You were the victim of behavior that was not right. You get used to being a victim. And so what happens easily when you grow up is that you can slide into a victim status, a victim mentality. And that as soon as things get a little bit rough, instead of saying, I can choose to respond differently, you go, poor me. Life sucks. Nobody likes me. See, what's the point? And you go down into this poor me party where you're the only guest. And it's not a pleasant place to be. But it feels familiar, and it even feels soothing for the first little bit as you kind of caress yourself as being poor me. But what I want you to understand is at that moment when you have been a victim for so long in your life, victim, you go there naturally. You go there because it's familiar, but you don't have to. And you can choose to not go there, but you're going to feel a real pull to go there. People of complex trauma, to truly, fully heal, they need to forgive the people that inflicted that trauma. Now, let me just say this. A lot of people, when they hear the word forgiveness, you hear stuff from your past. And a lot of people hear, you should just make up your mind and forgive the person. It's water under the bridge, forgive and forget, like it's that simple. Forgiveness actually is a process. You go through a lot of different emotions, from anger, from sadness and depression. That's all part of coming to terms with the trauma. Then you reach a point where you say, you know what, I have to let go of wanting to hate that person, not for their benefit, but for me, to free me up from hanging on to this stuff that keeps me in a place of bitterness and anger and resentment. Forgiveness becomes an important piece. Next one, not everybody would agree with me in this, but I think there's a spiritual component to dealing with complex trauma. And here's how I would emphasize it or explain it. In my work as a counselor with people of complex trauma, the people that have the greatest healing are usually people who have a spiritual connection. Spiritual connection with kind of a God that loves them. There's a lot of comfort and help that can come from that. And then the final thing is persist, don't give up. Remember at the beginning that battle, you have the battle between discouragement and hope. Discouragement, and I'm going to stick at this. You have to stick at it. And again, let me say this. Right now, it might seem really intense. Right now, it might seem like a huge mountain to have to climb. but persist, and it will begin to not seem so intense, and you'll start to see a lot of positives coming out of it. But I really hope that you're able to, in your own life, start to experience insight, healing, and growth. Let's just pray.